Hello and welcome to a most excellent Diminishing returns this week as a really good approximation of Keanu Reeves, but you can't see that. Like, I'm not vocally. I, Sol Harris, am joined by Mr. Alan Turing.
Esquire.
And his most bodacious brother, Gareth.
Station!
Yeah, we're going to be talking about the Bill and Ted duology. Is there a less terrible word I can use for a pair of films? Yeah, couple. The Bill and Ted coupling of Excellent Adventure and Bogus Journey this week, because allegedly Bill and Ted Face the Music, the third entry in the franchise, is coming out soon, but that's still up in the air somewhat.
We live in uncertain times, so when it comes to film release dates, we just have to roll with it.
I mean, we in case this affects the content at all, I'm just going to say up front, we set this record date based on an earlier release date the film had, and it has since already been delayed again, but we decided to just record now and let the episode sit on a shelf for a couple of weeks, so we've got it in the can.
So yeah, we are doing the Bill and Ted film. So Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, followed by Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Modern classics.
Really?
I probably would have agreed with you a week ago.
Before you watched them again.
I must admit, I think of these films being a big part of pop culture and quite mainstream. But then when I was looking them up as part of my rewatch, they're constantly referred to as cult films, which I found quite odd. Because my knowledge of these films, I mean, not to get too... Well, I guess let's just jump straight into it. You know, I remember being very young and my mum kind of going on about... I think it was a Bill and Ted cartoon that I'd stumbled on. And my mum being like, oh, wow, it's Bill and Ted, huh? That sounds like it's actually them. And me as a child not understanding what Bill and Ted were at all. And then just being hit over the head with Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey repeatedly on, I'm going to guess ITV2 at a certain age growing up.
Well, again, you've immediately made me feel old there, Sol. I'll tell you my Bill and Ted. I went to see Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure at the cinema with my friend Damo in Doncaster.
I have not been born yet.
I don't know why I remember this so distinctly. It must have been a really big decision, but we really couldn't make our minds up whether we went to see this film or Weekend at Bernie's.
Oh, God.
We opted for Bill and Ted. And do you know what? I've still never seen Weekend at Bernie's, actually.
Oh, my God. You know what, Alan? I mean, I keep forgetting about it, but we've really got to do Weekend at Bernie's on this podcast. And I say that more than anything because we've really got to do Weekend at Bernie's 2, which involves actual, like, voodoo zombies and a treasure hunt, and it is one of the strangest films I've ever seen. But yeah, Weekend at Bernie's is a kind of... It's not even so bad it's good. It's just so stupid and naff that it's kind of funny in an ironic... It's the ultimate hipster film.
Well, Sol, I would be up for that. As I say, I've never seen it. But Bill and Ted, right, so I went to see this in the cinema in, what was it, 1989?
Yeah.
I honestly think I haven't seen it again until this week. I've seen, like you, I've seen Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey countless times. But watching Excellent Adventure again this week, it was almost like I'd never seen it before. It was a really, really quiet memory. And it's been very difficult to find online and to find copies of it. And I'm assuming, therefore, that it's never been on the telly. It's just been on the shelf somewhere. I don't know if there's like a rights reason for that.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into how Bill and Ted came about a little bit. The two writers, Chris Matheson and Ed Solomon. Sol, do you know who Chris Matheson is?
Of course I do.
I don't.
He's the writer of a Goofy movie.
Yes.
He's also, I mean, what you're getting at is he is the son of acclaimed sci-fi horror author, of whom I'm a massive fan, Richard Matheson.
I Am Legend. Richard Matheson, I Am Legend.
That's right, yeah.
Yes.
I did notice, however, so I did notice that Goofy movie credit on his thing there. I clocked that for you.
I'm I'm a big fan of Chris Matheson. He's done some decent work.
Well, what I read was that Chris Matheson and Ed Solomon, they did these characters as kind of like a stand-up act. The two of them would go up on stage and
Really?
and
Right.
discuss current events, but with as idiots, they don't know what they're talking about. And it was a little comedy bit they did.
That explains a lot about this film.
And off the back of that, they went, let's write a film around these guys. So obviously, the whole time travel element of it was an add-on to that. I don't think that was ever part of their kind of character creation in the first place.
Well, it makes sense that, regarding the sequels, I suppose this is something we'll talk about more later, but they kind of do time travel in the first film and then that's it.
Yeah.
It doesn't really play a huge role in the subsequent films, although it is present there.
If you actually think about the plot, it's very odd. They have...
It's bizarre, yeah.
These two basically slacker teen characters, yeah? But then it's... In the future, their music kind of brings tranquility to the entire universe and peace. And he never really...
They're like this modern day Confucius,
Yeah.
where the whole society, rests on their thoughts.
But he never even kind of explains that. It's just like, someone from the future comes down, yeah, it's fine.
I was really surprised when I sat down to rewatch this the other day. I remember there being a lot more exposition. I remember George Carlin kind of saying, look, this is what the deal is, guys. You have to do this, otherwise the future will go dystopian rather than utopian or whatever. And they never really establish those stakes. They're all kind of implicit or read about on Wikipedia to remind myself what this film is about. I don't know.
I might be giving them a bit too much credit here, but perhaps that's a really nice bit of subtle writing. Oh, sorry, that's too much credit. No, but my point is, you're right. They never explicitly say it, and yet it is understood. So, they get the point across quite well.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a very odd way of doing things. Yeah.
It's a weird script in that what actually happens is really quite simple. There's not a lot of plot going on. They kind of go back in time, pick up some old dudes, bring them back to present a history project, and that's it. But then, you're dealing with time travel, you're dealing with a utopian, future, and it definitely feels like there's kind of the makings of a really great film here that never quite gets there.
Yes. Yeah.
And even with the second film, we'll get onto it, but, a similar kind of feeling. There's a lot of ideas going on here. And I just need to kind of coalesce them a little bit more.
They're not that funny. It's kind of a really lightweight, almost like family film feel. And
it feels like an extended sketch. It feels like do you know what it feels like? It feels like Wayne's World. I know Wayne's World came later, but Wayne's World was a Saturday Night Live sketch that they made into a film, which, was maybe a bit of a stretch. Obviously, Bill and Ted didn't start as a sketch, but that's exactly what it feels like. It feels like they've taken a 10-minute premise and made the film out of it.
Well, like I say, if it came from this sort of stand-up routine they did, that's essentially, it is. They just go up and do a sketch and, and they've fleshed it out.
I tell you, the other thing I kept thinking about was Beavis and Butthead. Did that come before or after this film? Because obviously they were on MTV in Littlewood.
After, actually.
But Beavis and Butthead it wasn't even a sketch show. They were 20-second interstitials between music videos, weren't they? That was even more of a stretch to pull out to a movie.
Beavis and Butthead is very much the same sort of thing, though, in that the joke here is that, and I suppose Dumb and Dumber as well, the joke here is that these two are so profoundly stupid that they will, go in circles with stuff and forget what, it's like Connor, friend of the show Connor, trying to explain Dumb and Dumber to Calvin. I remember this back at uni. Calvin wasn't that keen on watching Dumb and Dumber. He'd never seen it. He thought it was just going to be these two idiots, real, lowbrow slapstick comedy, which arguably it is. But I remember Connor saying to him, Calvin, they're so stupid it transcends stupidity. It comes round the other side, and I think it's that same thing. There was obviously a wave in the late 80s, early 90s of just people we'd had Laurel and Hardy, and we'd had the kind of clown characters and double acts, these buffoon characters, and it almost feels like it was reaching its apex of just, let's just push this to the absolute farthest extreme.
They are obviously unremittingly stupid, but I do enjoy their egregious vocabulary.
Yeah.
I like the way they talk. The language.
It sets it apart from just being a kind of like California surfer dude kind of.
They're not just grunting monosyllabically.
One thing I did read about the original script was that they were envisioned as 14-year-olds who were just kind of a bit losers, kind of a bit geeky, and they just wore heavy metal t-shirts and stuff like, which is even more Beavis and Butthead. Yeah. But then when they cast it, obviously they go for older actors just for whatever, it makes it easier to film. But you got Keanu Reeves, particularly, but Alex Winter as well, I suppose. They were a bit too handsome and sort of sexy and cool to play to be quite the same as they envisioned them. So it went into this more kind of surfer dude kind of slacker thing. But I think there's a couple of things that really make them stand out, and they're slightly different from other things that are going on. One is that they never mention drugs, they're never smoking weed or anything like that. And it doesn't even feel like it's particularly implied. And the other thing I think that really sets it apart, and I think this is to do with perhaps a long-term why people like it, is it's just kind of unrelentingly positive and optimistic.
That is so true. Keanu Reeves in particular is so lovely. He is always complimenting people. He's always saying that was a most excellent round of charades.
Yes.
He's just a really nice bloke. There's not a nasty bone in their body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, that's written into the plot, though. That it's an important part of the characters.
Well, this is why the world has based its philosophy upon their thoughts.
Yeah, but
exactly.
But
I think that is, I think they have to be relentlessly positive characters for us to buy that their music will ultimately bring the world together in a utopia. And I think that's a really nice, it hammers home that, they are just lovely, incorruptible, people.
But I do think that is something that makes the film as a whole more likable, and just kind of you come away from it going, that's nice.
There's a really sharp contrast there with Beavis and Butthead, because Beavis and Butthead are horrible. Oh yeah, people. They're really. I mean, they're stupid, but they're really horrible. You don't have any sympathy with them.
What I was going to say before is just that I find it weird when I go back to these films, and I think maybe it's just the era in which they were made, but they are comedies, and they're kind of funny and in a vaguely amusing way, but they're not big laugh out loud gags. And I don't know if that's just you would never get a comedy with this tone made and released in this day and age under normal circumstances, which I suppose is going to lead on to a bit of discussion about the third film later on. But there's something about the tone they strike here that's such a kind of light comedy, rather than
it's not gags, is it?
It's getting by on charm and likability more, and warmth more than out and out hilarity.
But you're right. When I watched this first time, I've watched these in 10 years or something. It's
pre-Simpsons, isn't it? I mean,
it was definitely less funny than I was expecting. Yeah, when I was watching it, it was just this is just all plodding along, and there's less happening than I expected.
When the teacher asked him who Joan of Arc was, and he said Noah's wife, that genuinely made me laugh. That was my first laugh of the film.
There's one moment in the two films where I properly laughed out loud, and it really got me.
Yeah.
And it's a joke I don't think I've ever seen before, because I'm guessing the credits have been cut off when it's been shown on TV. But it was the very end of Bogus Journey, when there's a montage of
the
newspaper headlines of what sort of spelling out what happens in the future. It actually reminded me of the ending of 22 Jump Street, which I still have up as one of the funniest sequences ever committed to film. But it was specifically a headline, I think, that said, "Death wins the Indy 500," and then the quote underneath was, I didn't realise I could run that fast. and that properly got me. But I think it's just because it really caught me off guard. But funnily enough, for reasons I'll get into later, I was looking up where those newspaper headlines stand, and apparently they were not written by the two writers, Chris Matheson and Ed Solomon. They were put together by
the production designer. Getting carried away.
Presumably the graphics team. Yeah, so perhaps it speaks to their style of humour as well as writers, that it was much more of an overt gag than what we get in the rest of the film.
So let's focus in on the first film.
So the basic premise is this is a time travel film, and before we really dig into it on a specific level here, I just want to say, like, as a big fan of the time travel genre, it's remarkably rare. Like, you really do not get a lot of films in particular that are as simple as this character gets a time machine and goes on an adventure to another time with it. It's usually a lot more, when it comes to time travel movies, it's usually a lot more like they're going to go back to something in their past or the future, or we're going to get something confusing with time loops and folding in on itself and going back to scenes we've seen earlier in the film. It's remarkably pure, this film, in that it is just, we're going back to medieval times, you know?
I was wondering, Sol, if you would get annoyed at the time travel in this film, or if you'd just be able to go with it.
Well, it doesn't make any sense when you dig into it, but I'm happy to go with it. It's fine.
Good. Right, good. We don't have to have that argument. Excellent.
You're the one who gets hung up on time travel, from what I remember, Gareth, aren't you? I'm usually the one who goes with it. That's what I remember from our Terminator episodes.
Yeah, you could be right there.
What I do like about the time travel element is they do kind of establish, look, while you're off fanning about in history, time is still ticking away here. And I don't know why they can't just come back earlier.
Yeah, there's no explanation for that.
But it's kind of like they're in a timeline and they're going along in a timeline. If they come away from that, they have to go back at the appropriate place.
Yeah.
I don't know if it quite makes
Alan,
sense.
I think you've already crossed the border of overthinking this.
But what I like about that is it establishes the ticking clock. You can't just, because you've got time travel, like, well, we could just take as long as we want. They then work around that anyway by waiting until after they finish the thing and then coming back to set up the tools they need. So I don't know, but it works. And it's one of those ones where you don't think too much about it. It's fine.
But yeah, I mean, just like I was saying, on that pure time travel adventure thing, like I really can only think of... There's, what's that film called, Alan? You'll know it. A Yankee in King Arthur's Court from the 40s.
Which is that
Connecticut Yankee.
That's it, yeah. Which is like a real classic. Oh, someone goes back to medieval times. There's obviously The Time Machine, which was made into a film in the 60s. But... you know, most time travel films aren't this straightforward, and you know, I've seen plenty of kids' cartoons and things that dabble in it, but it's a surprisingly untapped. You know, even Back to the Future was never like, hey, let's hop in the DeLorean and go look at some dinosaurs. It was just this weird kind of thing about a family story, you know? And it's kind of nice that this film exists as this pure distillation of that. Although even then, the film is more focused on their here and now and their homework assignment than the time they spend exploring a medieval castle.
They go into history, grab a guy, and come back.
There isn't really a villain in the first film. You know, it's just that they are destined to flunk most egregiously. That's the jeopardy. As opposed to the second film where you've got a big bad villain, that, you know, it's just like, oh, we want to pass, we don't want to get sent to military school.
But that's it. There's something so sort of beautifully simple about it all, isn't there?
Yes, exactly. I love it.
It makes sense that it was conceived of with, you know, 14-year-old kids in mind, because the basic premise of we have to do our homework and we're not good at doing it speaks so much to a kid, I think, more than...
They're the stakes, yeah.
Yeah. So basically they're gonna fail their year at school. That means military academy and that sort of thing for them. They're set up as not having the best lives in the world. Like, they're comfortable middle-class existences, but one of their dads is going out with someone they went to school with a few years above them, which... they're obviously not too happy with.
That's another weird little gag that never really goes anywhere. They just sort of occasionally roll it out. But yeah, the idea that Bill's dad, who's obviously like a 50-year-old guy, has shacked up with a girl that was like a few years ahead of them in high school. We're never given any reason why. We're very much given the sense that she likes older men and she doesn't really care which one.
Well, it's almost just a setup for the gag in the second film, which is that she's then divorced Bill's dad, is it, and married Ted's dad? Is that right? No, it's the other way around, isn't it?
Ted doesn't appear to have a mum. That's never really addressed.
Yeah.
She just doesn't exist.
But it is a weird little gag, yeah, and it's just it's weird. Like you say, it's the level of comedy that they're working with, and it just feels like that is something that you're improving in character, and you're like, oh, you know, when your dad married the girl that we fancied in high school, you know, it's like.
I think it speaks to the time it was made, though. I've seen a fair few comedies from the 80s that are this kind of, I don't know, just not very funny kind of, you know. It reminds me of, if you've ever seen those two characters that Rick Moranis and Dave, what's his name, do, the two sort of Canadian guys. It's that same kind of improv where it's kind of impossible to dislike them or what they're doing, but it isn't exactly funny. and it's like I say, it's pre-Simpsons. I think comedy has become a lot more quick fire and gag centric than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And you want more jokes packed into a condensed down into a
I think if you compare a film like this with something like, I don't know, like a Seth Rogen film or a Judd Apatow film,
yeah,
you know, they're the modern equivalent.
Yeah,
you know, those comedy features, and they're completely different.
Even those are, well, that's it. Those are a lot more, like, they're obviously doing a similar thing, but I think they're far more distilled because, as I've said many times on the show, yeah, and they are, you know, you get your actors to improvise for half a day's filming, and then you whittle it down to 3 minutes. Whereas this feels like they did as many takes as you would on any film and improvised a bit, and that was it. So it just doesn't quite have the same. And maybe that speaks to digital filming techniques, perhaps. You know, I suppose these were presumably shot on film, and therefore you couldn't do thousands of takes and have hours and hours and hours of footage to fuck about with at the end of it.
Yeah.
Should we get into the film? Because I have lots of hot takes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I want to talk about George Carlin,
yes,
for whom I have a great deal of admiration as a comedian.
Yeah.
But not a lot as an actor.
Another comedian who, to be honest, is a similar thing. I've watched many George Carlin stand-up recordings. Again, I never really laugh out loud in them. I just sort of think like, oh, that was nice hearing him talk in that vaguely amusing way for an hour.
I like George Carlin, so let's get that on the record. He is a terrible actor in this. I mean, you know, he's so wooden.
Fine.
Oh, come on. I know the budget's low and they probably couldn't afford anyone better, but still. Do you think they just were fans and they liked him, they knew him, they wanted to give him a job? What's the story there?
Well, what I heard was they wanted Eddie Van Halen.
That would make sense.
Because obviously they're talking about Eddie Van Halen. They go, oh, we need to get Eddie Van Halen in the band to play guitar. So they wanted it to be him, to be like a hero of theirs. But they couldn't get him, and they tried a few other people. But then they kind of settled to let's get a comedian. It's a comedy. Hey, let's get a comedian. But apparently he was brought on board after they'd started filming. And so it was a very late thing. And really, he's not in it much. He establishes a bit of exposition at the beginning, and then brings them the booth. And doesn't even really tell them much. It doesn't like say, "Oh, don't do this. Be careful with this." It's just like, "Here's a time machine. See what happens."
Yes, my memory, he was with them the whole time, but of course he's not.
Yeah.
You know, he just basically is a very, as you say, very light touch introduction, and goes off till the end. Yeah.
Now the phone booth thing, is that a reference to Doctor Who?
Yeah, it's got to be, hasn't it?
No, apparently not. Well,
come on, how can it not be?
But apparently what it was in the original idea. It was a van, like they had a van because they have a band, and they travel through time in the van somehow. But then they were like, Back to the Future, they do it in a car, let's do something different. Phone booth. And like Doctor Who does it in a phone booth. I don't know, they know that or not.
In this day and age, you could not make this film without someone pointing out the similarities somewhere along the way in production. But in '89, maybe you could in America. Yeah.
What about when they actually do travel through time? What do we think of the rendering of the circuits of time? Do you remember Max Headroom? It was making me think Max Headroom would be in there somewhere.
Look,
and bear in mind, this is 5 years. This is 5 years after Terminator.
Yeah, but before
Terminator 1.
Come on.
Yeah.
Terminator.
But I mean, this first film has got a pretty sketchy budget, hasn't it? It's a pretty low budget film. They haven't got money to be throwing around on time travel.
I think it's pretty fine for the 80s. You know, they get a lot of use out of their medieval setting and so on. That all looks the part. It only really falls down on the CGI effects, and even that's quite yeah, exactly. You know, and they've obviously gone for more of a jokey rendition than a attempt at realism, haven't they?
Yeah, because of the nature of the film. I do like what I really like about those circuits of time sequences is the shot of like when they're showing them in the booth, like just looking out the door going, whoa! And like it's obviously like just they're moving the camera around and they're just like going, oh, because you just know. I read something. So the production of this film, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the company that made it, the De Laurentiis company, they went bankrupt after the film was completed, but before it was released, and that's why it got delayed. So this film was made in '87. It was scheduled to be released in '88. It got pushed back by a year. So you know, they shopped it around. The filmmakers shopped it around and said, "Look, the company's gone bust. Do you want to buy this to distribute it?" But you know, someone bought it. Someone bought the distribution rights and put it out, and ended up it being a bit of an unexpected success. But I did read something. I think it was Alex Winter who was saying, like, when we were making this film, no one thought it was going to be anything. Like, it was a stupid thing, a stupid plot. There was no money. Sure. Everything looked stupid. We were sat in a phone booth where they were moving the camera around, and we're going, whoa! Like, it was just a stupid nonsense film. And it ended up being much more successful than anyone anticipated. Not just at the time, but like they're making a third film 30 years later. It's managed to maintain some sort of legacy. Yeah, be that a cult hit.
You just can't predict these things, can you? You never. I don't think at the time you can predict it at all.
I mean, it has to be said, a big part of that, like, I do not think they would be making this third film were it not for the fact that Keanu Reeves' star power has exploded in recent years. And that's interesting because Keanu Reeves is the one whose career has exploded. Because I would say, not that, you know, I think they're both doing a great job for what they are in this film. But I think Alex Winter is marginally less bad in these films. I think he's a better actor.
Do you know what? I haven't got a counter argument to that, but the notion of ranking these two as actors based on this data is it's just like they're not doing anything. You know, they're not. It's one. I mean, it's one note, isn't it? All you've got to do is hit that note. Yeah. And there were probably 100 actors in Hollywood at that time who could have done that.
I don't know about that. You know, I think
I am a Keanu Reeves fan. I'm not. You know, I'm not trying to disparage him, but in this particular case, God, there's nothing there.
I think they bring something to it. The two of them, there's a charm that you're not necessarily going to get with anyone. I'm not saying it's acting ability particularly, but they're doing what is needed for the role. There's a likability to them. I think they have chemistry. When they cast it, you know, they paired people up to see who worked together, and they got on well. So that was kind of why they got the part. I agree. I think Alex Winter comes along better than this. To say he never did much else, and
I think he has more moments with, you know, something approaching a second note to what he's doing than Keanu Reeves does.
Keanu Reeves, I mean, his career is one of the most bizarre things ever, really, and lucky.
His life is one of the most bizarre things, yeah. I mean, Alex Winter hasn't been able to sustain a career as an actor. He's become a relatively successful documentary director and director of kind of internet comedy.
Movie.
Yeah. Which, you know, is fine. Good.
But I think the Keanu Reeves phenomenon. I think this is we might have talked about this before. I think this is a really good example of the power of being a nice bloke. Once you've got a certain level of ability and acting talent, over that threshold, a lot of it's luck, but a lot of it is people want to work with him because he's a nice bloke. And I think that goes a long way. I think in a 30-year career, that makes a massive difference.
The Jeremy Renner effect. I agree, and like, don't get me wrong, I've seen some great Keanu Reeves films. I stopped myself saying great Keanu Reeves performances then. I don't think he's a good actor at all. I think you can work what he does into a particular thing that will work.
He's very good at what he does.
What about, Alan, Toy Story 4?
Oh yeah, actually, that's a good performance. I'll give you that, yeah.
Yeah. That is the only one I can think of, but yeah.
He did this sort of teen heartthrob thing, kind of, in the 80s, and he was in, what was it, Parenthood or something he was in, and then Speed was the thing that suddenly made him a star, and then that faded over the few years because he was just doing shitty action films. And then he did another shitty action film.
Point Break is the...
That's a good point, yeah. Point Break and then Speed. And then he did another shitty action film called The Matrix, which for some reason suddenly became a huge hit. And because in order to nail... No, I do like The Matrix, actually. My point is, on paper, it was just another action film. They were struggling for budget. They threw a load of percentage points at him to get him. And he's made a fucking bajillion dollars off of the back of that. And so he just does whatever he wants now.
And nobody would begrudge it of him. Lovely bloke.
That's it, exactly. Yeah, fuck it, whatever. Keanu Reeves.
Whenever I hear people tell me how much I need to watch John Wick, it usually comes down to Keanu Reeves is brilliant. And then that usually comes down to, well, not as an actor, but he's just such a nice guy.
Yeah,
it's like the average people on the street want to go and watch his movies because he's known for being such a nice guy. It's a very odd situation.
I have pretty strong feelings about John Wick. If you ever cover that, I want it in.
I've never seen
I'm sure we will.
So, based on the idea that Keanu Reeves' career is based on him being a nice guy, Alex Winter must be a right arsehole. But yeah, I like him in this. And like I say, I think they do bring something that you're not just going to get with any actors. I'd like to take this opportunity to mention the live-action TV series that they did, a spin-off, called Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures, with 2 other actors in it. Now, there is a Saturday morning kind of kids' TV cartoon thing.
Yeah, they reprised the roles for that, yeah.
Well, you just showed us this. We just saw a clip of this earlier before recording. I was gobsmacked. I didn't even know it existed.
No, I didn't.
I watched about 15 minutes of it, and it was awful.
But that's it. Is it really any different to the film? It's like, what is the difference? Like,
so that is a really good question, because it was worse, but why? And I can't tell you why. Is it that charm? Is it that there was just that charm missing?
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a fair question.
But these 2 actors who have not gone on to do anything particularly spectacular, playing Bill and Ted, and they look a bit like Bill and Ted.
Evan Richards and Christopher Kennedy.
Yeah, they look the part a bit, but they're doing a kind of impersonation. But it's just a weird. It feels like a weird TV knockoff, which is what it is. But
Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventures is brought to you by Levi Strauss & Company, makers of Levi's Big Jean, the Levi's jean with a little more room for living large.
Hurry, dude! Miss Pearl said we had to be here by 9 o'clock sharp or we forfeit our spot. Thanks for the ride, Mrs. Logan. Totally wish his luck, Mom.
It doesn't have a charm to it. It's just nonsense. But maybe in addition to those guys, the rest of the cast in this film, there are some real highlights that I think bring a great likability to the film. So
yeah.
You've got all these historical figures that they bring back.
I have to say, Alan, I think what you're saying about likability in the performances, I'm almost hesitant to put that down to the actors, because I would say that extends to pretty much everyone in this film, which almost suggests it's something the director's doing. Because I get that same degree of likability and warmth from the guy playing Napoleon, or
Socrates, Billy the Kid.
Yeah, Socrates. Yeah, Billy
Well,
the
that's
Kid.
it. Those are the ones that stand out. So Napoleon has his own little subplot where he's running around town. Although Napoleon himself is a bit of an arsehole, it's quite fun and it's silly and the kids ditch him and all that. He goes to the water slides. It's it's silly and fun. And then you've got the first two people they pick up, Billy the Kid and Socrates, and then they're kind of there all the time. And they have their own little kind of buddy adventures thing. Like that's the spin-off. They turn up and save them, where they've somehow infiltrated this world and become executioners.
I would prefer a spin-off TV series of Billy the Kid and Socrates' further adventures.
Yeah. And then you see them chatting up to young ladies in the mall, and they've obviously got a good chemistry going on between the two of them. But that's it. And the guy playing Socrates, Tony Steedman, who's a British guy, he does a lot. Well, did. I don't know if he's still alive, but he must be pretty old. Loads of sitcom acting. He was a comedy actor. He just brings such a joyous presence. Like it is like this kind of, this ancient man, like in the modern world, just fascinated by everything around him. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And
even beyond these big time travel characters, Joan of Arc's another one, but they're kind of obvious places to shine. But I'd extend it past that. The guy plays Ted's dad, for example. I think he has that exact same degree of charm and likability, and particularly in the second film where he has to portray. He has to portray really himself possessed by Ted.
That was a nice
and he just absolutely nails it. It's
okay, dudes. Fellow policemen. My son, Ted Theodore Logan, and his friend, Bill S. Preston Esquire, have been murdered and replaced by evil robots from the future.
You totally did it, dude. I totally possessed my dad.
Not that it's a particularly hard thing to do, but to see a man.
No, he does it well. He has the body, he does the mannerisms. He does a great job.
But that's it. To see a man who kind of looks that stuffy and old normally just go for it. It's like watching Joe Pesci getting smashed in the face in Home Alone. You just don't expect to see people like that doing something that well and like giving it their all. And yeah. I think the cast across these films, both of them actually, are quite remarkable. Just in terms of how warm and likable they all are.
I'd like to talk about when they go back to the medieval times and find the babes,
princesses.
They see them up at a high window, so obviously they believe in love at first sight, like Christopher Nolan. One of the things that made me laugh the whole movie the most was where Bill thinks Ted's been killed because he sees the soldier stabbing. and then Ted turns up and it's explained away with like, I bounced out of my armour when I fell, dude.
Just fell out of my armour.
Funny.
Like, what?
Yeah, that's it. And then they move on, and that's it. That's how that's resolved. You have this sort of 90 seconds of tension. Oh my God, Ted's dead. No, I fell out my armor. such a great reveal.
Also, that is the moment where we get the one bit which really feels dated, where realizing Ted is still alive, they embrace, and then suddenly realize what they're doing, step away, and go.
I fell out of my suit when I hit the floor.
Which is, it's of its time. It's the 80s. But it is, and we're talking about this likability of the whole film and these characters. That's the bit that sort of jumps out as a sort of, that's a bit negative, even if it was the 80s. Like, that's a bit like, But, like, teenage boys in the 80s, that was normal. It wouldn't, it wasn't exactly...
When Bill he thinks Ted is dead, and he's over his body, and he says, bogus, heinous, non-triumphant. And I have written down here, this is Shakespearean. What I mean by that is the language they're using is not... It's like it's not modern day language. It's not the language that you and I would use. It's English, but it's not quite normal English. And you've got this medieval scene and this tragedy unfolding, and it's like a piss take of Shakespeare.
That's the other thing that makes these characters stand out from just general kind of slacker stoner types is the language, and this very unusual language they use, but this superlative language they use. Everything is most triumphant, like most excellent, or most non-excellent, or whatever. But it obviously comes from the writers who, you know, it just sounds like they workshopped these characters on stage for a long time and just created their own little language. But it works. It brings such character to it and this individuality that you don't get anywhere else.
On that note, Alan, should we workshop a movie, Japanese Bond and asthmatic Bond's excellent adventure?
No.
So that after medieval England, we get this montage of them just going and getting more historical characters, and it's just like really quick one scene. They grab Frood, Sigmund Frood, and they get Beethoven and Joan of Arc. Jane Wiedlin, by the way. Jane Wiedlin was a big pop star in 1989.
Yeah, I read about this. I don't know who she is, but I was looking her up, and she was in the Go-Go's, right?
I love Jane Wiedlin. I had a real thing for Jane Wiedlin in the 80s. Yeah, so then they get Genghis Khan and Abraham Lincoln, and then they go back to San Dimas, and this is where the plot unfolds. But there's some really lovely business here, where they get them all back and they take them to the mall to experience 20th century San Dimas. And I love the bit where Missy's in the house, and they say, Missy, these are our school friends. Bob Genghis Khan and Dennis Socrates.
Just the weakest.
Dennis Socrates is the name for the ages.
Yeah, they come back to the modern day. You got these historical figures in modern day. They cause chaos. It just feels like that's the film. Surely that's your plot, and then they have to go and get them back, and like that feels like that should be the first 20 minutes, and then the whole film is like them trying to rescue someone from prison. So someone's gone off and done this. They got to get them back. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like all the build-up to this, the previous hour of the film.
What you're saying, Alan, what you're saying there makes perfect sense. You're right. That is how a movie should be structured. But this is better. This is much quicker. I'm serious. This is just it's a quick montage, a little bit of antics, and then this little prison breakout. And that's it. And that's all it needs to be. You're right. They could stretch that into a 90-minute film, but it wouldn't be very good.
But it feels like if you're going to sell a film, like that's what you get historical figures, put them in the modern day, chaos ensues. So, yeah, ultimately, bit of shenanigans in the mall, which is funny. That's the kind of probably the most comedy-focused bit. Like, the stuff they're doing, it's designed to be funny, I guess. The most egregious, if I may use that word, most egregious play was when they're trying to, Socrates and Billy the Kid are trying to chat with these two women, and Frood turns up holding a corn dog, and then it's like... and then it droops as these women like reject him. Oh dear, very poor. And then take them to the history assignment thing. They're going to show them off. They do that, like the conclusion basically. So they get each of these historical figures to talk about their experiences of San Dimas. And there was a bit in that as well where Frood is analysing Ted. And I was just like, why aren't they doing this with Bill, given that he wants to shag his mum? Like, surely that's the obvious gag here. And then they did the gag anyway, so it's fine. But yeah, so that's it really. They put on this bodacious display of history knowledge, and the professor, who presumably thinks they've just hired a load of actors and got them to say things, thinks they've done their research.
Can I just, before you move on, because that bit, that scene, their history project is great, no doubt. When they thought, okay, the culmination of this film will be them presenting these historical characters, and they're all sort of showing off and doing their skills. So you've got Genghis Khan, and he's doing his weapons display.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with Sigmund Freud? Like, I don't know, pick a different character. What if you didn't have Sigmund Freud in this film, but picked a character that could do something, I don't know, a bit more dynamic? What would the film lose? What is Sigmund Freud bringing to this film that we couldn't do without?
Yeah, I think it is a nice mix.
What I'm asking is how the hell did they come up with these final 6 or 7 characters?
So in the original film, actually filmed, the ending was they present these people in their classroom that we see at the beginning, and it's just like, oh look, here's some historical figures. And then the kind of triumphant finish was the prom, and they take the princesses to the prom. And that was all filmed, and then they watched it back and realised this is a bit of a flat anticlimactic ending, and so they changed it to this big stage event lots of lights and things, and presenting these historical figures. So that was a change, a reshoot, basically, to make it a bit more climactic and a bit more exciting. But then you do have, it's just like, the princesses turn up at the end for a happy ending. There was no prom, which was like, obviously ask them to the prom earlier. That was the whole point. That's the film.
Oh, there's one last thing about the final stage show. Rufus brings them futuristic guitars. Now, these futuristic guitars are the most 1980s things I've ever seen.
Just guitars you can't tune.
It's like the music in Blade Runner. It's supposed to be futuristic, but it's actually just the most 1980s.
Yeah. So let's rate Excellent Adventure, the first Bill and Ted film. Get a sense of how we feel about that. Gareth, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm going to give it an 8. I think it's obviously not a classic, but I think it held up. It's dated in one sense, but it still made me laugh. It was still a nice way to spend 90 minutes. As you said before, it's not a laugh out loud raucous comedy, but it's got a lot of charm, and I think that's worth 8.
Okay.
It's a classic in the sense that it has, truly left its mark on pop culture. I mean, Avengers Endgame name drops it at one point.
Oh, well then.
The highest grossing film of all time, that is, Alan.
You've made it when you're in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Exactly.
Well, I basically agree, but I just can't get past like the shortcomings. It feels like it could be better. I just want another pass on the script somehow. Basically, I gave it a 7. I guess is the conclusion to that.
I'm in a similar vein to that. Yeah, I think the pieces are here to make a real great film. It doesn't quite come together, but it's still a really enjoyable, nice bit of fun. There's obviously an element of nostalgia at play with this one, but I think that's nostalgia that anyone can kind of tap into. Vaguely amusing, so I give it a 7 out of 10 as well.
Hey, talking about enduring, not only does it made it into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but in the Allen family, we still say Ziggy Piggy every time someone eats a lot of pudding to this day.
Well, I must say, I mean, I think this film taught me how to say shit in French.
Now that is legacy.
Yeah.
So off the success of the first film, I think it kind of overperformed for its budget. It was quite low budget though. Yeah, something of a niche success, I guess, but better than expected. They funded the sequel, and the sequel obviously has a bigger budget.
Yeah, you can see the budget's there, isn't it?
If you're coming to write a second film, you go, right, some sort of time travel shenanigans, surely, right?
Yeah, they haven't been to ancient Egypt yet. Let's have them meet Cleopatra and
Yeah, but they've done that. They want to go in a new direction.
But I think this speaks to what we were saying, that obviously they've started with the characters first and figured out the rest second. And, normally a film like this, you would go, it's a time travel movie. But obviously to the writers, it wasn't. And I've heard Ed Solomon say, the thing he's proudest about with this film is that it wasn't just a rehash, which it very easily could have been. Yeah. So, yeah, Bogus Journey, bizarrely, is about the two venturing into the afterlife, having been killed.
Yeah. And it does incorporate the time travel elements. Obviously, there's the person who's trying to get rid of them is from the future. Some sort of future terrorist who's trying to bring down the utopian society. Does imply it's not so much of a utopia if there are people who don't like it.
Yeah.
But let's not get into politics.
This is Terminator, isn't it? He's been sent from the future to destroy you.
Yeah, so they have to kill Bill and Ted.
This came out the same year as T2, for what it's worth.
But yeah, that's exactly what they do. Future robots that look exactly like Bill and Ted are sent back in time to kill Bill and Ted and replace them and sort of destroy their legacy.
And here we get to see a little bit of Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves' range as actors.
We certainly do. You said that with a sneer in your voice, Saul. How dare you?
I think they do a really great job of being evil Bill and evil Ted.
They're obviously having fun doing it.
Yeah, exactly. But they're relishing in doing the same thing but just kind of evil, and it's great. It's a really good job.
But here's the truth. We're totally gonna kill you now. No way! Yes way, Ted. We're fully programmed to do it. Yeah, and we want to do it too. You dick, Bill!
I can't believe I'm going to agree with you, Saul, on this. But you know what? You're absolutely right, because it is they play it very close, don't they? It's very close. It's just the other side of that line, rather than being over the top. Oh my God! Yes, aren't they? Oh Christ!
Because they're still playing it as absolute brainless buffoons as well. You know, I think the impulse would be to do it as people who know what they're doing.
It's a really good performance. You convinced me. I can't believe it.
But that's it. Even the guy who has made these robots and sent them on their quest hates them because they're just Bill and Ted. They're just stupid, but they're evil. So they're stupid.
The guy who makes them,
kill people.
Joss Ackland.
Yeah.
I mean,
what's he doing?
I mean, Joss Ackland has made some ripe old shit. Let's be honest. But you know, he's a proper actor. How did they get him? Well, how did they get him to do this? They paid him, obviously.
I read a couple of things about this. He has not been particularly complimentary about the film. He said I've done a lot of bad things in my time because I'm a workaholic. That was one thing he said. He just takes.
I'm a workaholic.
He takes any job that comes along. And the other thing,
student film, then Josh, you money grabbing bastard.
The other thing he said was that he did the film as a result of a bet, which I didn't get any further explanation of. But we do set up this main villain, played by Joss Ackland, who is called Denomalos, which is Ed Solomon backwards, of course. Ed Solomon being one of the writers. He kind of gets lost in it a little bit because it sets up the idea, but really we're looking at these robots that come back and we're dealing with that in the moment. He sort of turns up at the end and it's a bit silly, but...
Big Joss is the big boss.
Yeah, it never quite plays as the kind of big bad. I think, it's someone who obviously doesn't care and isn't interested in doing a very interesting performance. And he's quite a boring, just sort of round white man, you know?
Early on in the film, I've written a note here. Joss Ackland seems to be a worse actor than George Carlin.
Oh,
now, I know he's not, but he didn't do a terrific job here, does he?
Well, I'm still not convinced George Carlin's terrible, to be honest. I've
Kevin Smith can get
I've seen George Carlin do some alright acting.
He doesn't do anything in that first film. Jersey Girl.
Oh yes, that's it. He's good. Right, he's legitimately good in Jersey Girl.
He's a dad. He's a nice granddaddy figure.
You know what? I take it back. You're absolutely right.
You know, in Star Wars, when Darth Vader takes his helmet off, and it's just like this sort of pasty white man with a collar on. That's what Denomalos looks like. Joss Ackland looks like in this film, and it's not scary. He's not, and because when we see the future, obviously got a bit more budget now. We set up that George Carlin has been pulled back in time, and obviously he's going to do something, but then he just disappears until the end. So that's just forgotten about. Obviously, there's a reveal involved with that.
Well, it's like the first day. It's like the first film. It's like they only had him for 3 days or something.
3 hours maybe. They didn't. Which is odd. I don't know. He is, to say he's kind of looking back, having not watched these films for several years, thinking he's a major character. He's probably got screen time of about 7 minutes over both films.
Totally, yeah.
But a much bigger character in this film, the kind of one new character that really makes a big splash is the Grim Reaper, William Sadler. I'm a big fan of William Sadler, I think. But I think it might be based on this film. Obviously, I know him from He's in Shawshank Redemption.
I know William Sadler. I've seen him in other things. But I didn't know it was him until this watch. So I sort of recognised him as the Grim Reaper. And then I looked up who it is. Oh, bloody hell, William Sadler. Right, okay. And that suddenly, made more sense. But did you notice he has a cameo in another role in this film?
Yes.
Where they flash across to the British kitchen later on when Denomalos takes over the cameras and he's playing to the whole world. William Sadler's playing this besuited British gentleman, which I thought was nice to let him have a go without the makeup on.
Yeah, and I did read as well the wife and daughter in that scene are his wife and daughter, William Sadler's.
Oh, is that right?
Wife and daughter, yeah.
I think William Sadler is really good here. I don't really know his work particularly, but there's there's so many little subtle comic touches to his performance that I never really picked up on when I was younger and I used to watch this, that I really enjoyed on this rewatch. Just the delivery of it, because he's playing quite a weird take on this character as well. And I guess the joke is that, wouldn't it be funny if Death was a kind of petulant bad loser? But then that is really funny.
You played well, Death, but you have a lot to learn about sportsmanship.
And I think his presence as Death, I mean, I might as well mention it here, speaks to just how gloriously batshit a weird film this is. This is a relatively mainstream audience they're striving for with this film. It is ultimately like a teen comedy, and yet there is a protracted sequence that is just a straight up parody of an Ingmar Bergman film.
That nobody in the target audience will have seen.
Yeah. And, I before I came to watch The Seventh Seal, when I was getting into film, I was well, very familiar with the idea of playing chess with death. But I think I kind of picked it up through osmosis from this film, maybe a bit from Last Action Hero. It must have been baffling back in 1991 when most people watched this. But then I think it's funny without knowing it's a parody of a black and white film from the 50s, isn't it? It works on both levels.
They could have had a line in there which would have made it more obvious, where he would have said, like, what's your game? Chess? And they're like, actually. And then it's like battleships or whatever.
Yeah. So for anyone who hasn't seen this, just to kind of make things explicitly clear, as we say, there's this bad guy from the future. He sends back some evil robot versions of Bill and Ted to kill Bill and Ted and take their place, to kind of change history.
And they do. They just kill him.
They succeed very early on, which is a really, it's quite a, even though I'd seen this film many times before, I kind of forgot what it was about. And it did kind of take me aback when they died. I was like, oh yeah, do they...
It was like Sean Bean in Game of Thrones. You're sitting thinking, this ain't going to happen, is it?
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Maybe it doesn't.
Anyway, so yeah, we get robot versions of them. I have to say, the effects work on realizing these robot versions of them is done so well. I mean, you basically...
Because they're actually genuinely robots, aren't they? They weren't actors. They built robots, versions of them. Probably dubbed in the voice. They couldn't do the voice as well, but, apart from that.
Well, Keanu Reeves, they could, definitely. There is no real Keanu Reeves. That's what.
Yeah, it's an upgrade from Wood, isn't it?
but in all seriousness,
we see him peeling off their skin and stuff.
Yeah, it's obvious what they're doing. They're Alex Winter's grabbing his cheek as hard as he can, and then they're cutting to a shot of a sort of animatronic endoskeleton, and then they're cutting back. But it's done really well.
I thought it worked.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
Really,
Saul.
really
nice
well.
Effect.
Yeah, even compared to like the fake Arnie head in Total Recall, it's better than that.
Yeah. And anyway, so then they have a series of bets with Death to not be. Oh, hang on, no. Do they go to hell? Do they go to hell before that? They do, don't they? Because they do go to hell.
Yeah, they go to hell and then they challenge Death.
No, because they Melvin Death to get away from him, and then they run off. Because then they have this whole section where they're kind of haunting their family and trying to get help.
They go to the seance. So the seance, right? So in the seance,
just coincidentally,
Missy is organising a seance.
Yeah,
that's how they get. Weird. That's how they get sent down to hell.
A midday seance.
She's got this group of people around, and they're all naming individuals that they want to make contact with, and it's not their long lost auntie or their grandparents. They've got this list of historical celebrities. So right, I've written this down. So here's the list: Gandhi, Anne Boleyn, Aristotle, President Chester A. Arthur, Clark Gable, Charlemagne, Ty Cobb. That is the sequel. That's the film this could have been.
Genuinely, I imagine that was what that was. I imagine they went, right, let's go with the list of people we would have met had this just been another time travel movie.
Well, I read that two of the guys in that seance are the writers.
Yeah.
So maybe that's their little wink at the audience.
Yeah.
They're also the waiters in the Ziggy Piggy scene. Actually, in the first film. Just trivia. Like you said in the first film, there's a lot going on in this film. There is this possession bit, the haunting bit. There's the challenge with death. There's the hell scene. Then there's the whole ending thing at the Battle of the Bands. There's all sorts of stuff going on.
When they get exorcised from the seance, I mean, that's such a funny scene when they're falling to hell. they just keep falling and they're screaming, and then they look at each other and say, "What now?" And then they carry on screaming. It's a really funny moment.
That is a gag I have seen probably 10, 15 times in different things, and I've got to give him credit because it is down to Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves. They sell it. Their performance here of just like, what do we do now? I don't know, just kind of looking around, and then and they just carry on screaming.
That is such a funny scene.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I really like about this film is the visual side of it, I guess. The way that they choose to realise some of the things. In the hell bit, we really get a lot of that. Like, what's your vision of hell, you know? And they do go for something quite metal, quite kind of metal album cover.
They even say, though, like, you know, this isn't like whatever album cover it is that they mention, because it's actually quite an interesting artistic interpretation of hell, you know? They're all on floating rocks on chains, and I think that's something they've come up with. I don't think that's a direct reference to anything in particular.
I don't think that's in scripture.
Yeah. But, you know, the obvious thing would have been they land in a pit of fire and brimstone and there's a little red guy dancing around with a pitchfork, and instead they go for something quite interesting. And I think that's true of the whole film, you know? It's really inventive.
Even their ideas of hell, like one of them is, they're sort of trapped in a military academy.
Yeah, and here we get yet another example of Alex Winter stretching his acting ability.
Oh, as his granny, I think it's fantastic job he does as a little...
Granny S. Preston, Esquire. No way.
How about a kiss? Oh, your dear old granny. Bill.
Oh, is that Alex Winter? I didn't know that was Alex Winter.
As Granny Preston, yeah.
That's funny.
It's a lovely bit of prosthetics as well, actually.
It's really well done, yeah.
It helps that it's filmed in kind of odd lighting, but I think it's a fantastic performance. There was kind of...
Well, I didn't know it was him.
Horrible old lady. But yeah, their idea of hell is like, having to kiss your old granny at a birthday party, or getting told off for stealing your brother's chocolate. Like, that's hell. There's a lot of, again, visually, there's some really interesting stuff there. Like the military academy thing is like very expressionism style, and they've got the light, the floodlights from above are painted on the floor. There's these white circles. It's just a weird little detail that I really like. The way this is shot is quite nice. I don't know how much of that's down to cinematography and production design, but I looked up the director to see what else he's done. This is his first feature film he did, Peter Hewitt. But he went on to do things like The Borrowers, Garfield. But then the one that really jumped out at me, Sol, I think you'll appreciate this, he directed Home Alone, The Holiday Heist.
I saw that, yeah, I did.
Far better than it should have been.
Yeah.
Of all the things I took away from this film, it was like, oh, I'm interested in what this director's done. Never quite lived up to it by the looks of things.
So then the narrative of the film, they escape from hell by challenging death. They beat death first at Battleship, and then at Twister, and what else? Best two out of three. But then they get to go to heaven, don't they? To try and find someone to help them defeat the evil robots. So I like the way that the first thing they do when they get to heaven is mug three heavenly three farmers. Which seems out of character, but they sort of get away with that. That's
they need to do. But it is cartoonesque. A lot of this stuff in these films are.
Yes.
They walk off camera, you hear some sort of punch sound effects, and then they walk back on 4 seconds later in full costume.
Including Death, who is wearing a costume over the top of his robe and scythe. Which is just a wonderful cartoonesque, detail.
Plus, there's no reason for them to do it. They don't go up to it and they go, "Oh, you can't come in." They just go, "Well, we better dress appropriately, I suppose."
And they get to talk to God.
They just go to God and go, "All right, mate, can you help us out?"
The first thing Ted does, and again, I've talked about this already. He says, First, let me compliment you on the creation of a most excellent planet. he's just such a nice bloke.
Yeah. We never hear or see God, do we? He just sort of sends them a map, and they go and find. So they ask to help the best scientists in the universe to help them build robots. It is, of course, it's not a human after all. It's not Einstein who's stood there who thought it was going to be. It's these two little alien things, but no other aliens in heaven whatsoever. Like they don't populate the world with sort of other creatures. It's just humans and Station.
I mean, this is something that always jumped out to me as a kid and took me out of it. But I think it's partly because, the gag is the reveal, and that wouldn't work if you were seeing a load of aliens on the way up to it. But they could have justified it with a sort of, this is the Earth entrance to heaven. And
this is human heaven or whatever.
Well, I think that Station is a rubbish character. I think he's got... Especially if you compare him to the character of Death. He's got no personality. There's no, obviously he's not speaking English as a language. But I don't think it could easily have been just a different human character and we would have got more out of it. I think it's a nothing character.
I like it because...
Yeah, it's just the bizarreness of this.
Yeah.
It's like there's been no context for this. There's no setup for it. It's just these two weird little things. And then at some point they jump into each other and become one big thing. It doesn't make any sense. And they only say one word.
Station is utterly alien, though. I like that. It's just so... This thing is so... I like the idea that the greatest mind in the world isn't human. And I like the idea that Station is just utterly doing his own thing, or its own thing, because it's just such a weird alien life form. And it's these two things that seem to operate as one. They operate under the name Station. Do you know where that name came from?
Yeah, go on.
Apparently, it was just a script error at one point when they were writing the film. They accidentally put a break in a location name. I think it was Police Station. So it just had the word Station written there, and they found it really funny, and so they just made that the name of the character.
You see, that's a writer's room joke.
Yeah.
But that's it. But in the context of this film, where nothing really makes any sense and nothing is kind of justified, it's just another weird thing that's going on.
I think you can certainly go along with it, but I don't know. I just doesn't. Station the character does not float my boat. It doesn't do anything for me.
I think Station, again, talking about the visual effects here, is again really well realised. For 1991, it is essentially just two, latex head-to-toe costumes that they've put some little people in, I'm guessing. But I kept looking at them, expecting to think, oh, that looks a bit shit. And I kept thinking, actually, no, they've kind of got away with it there, Maybe when Station goes big, it's not quite as impressive, but... I like Station.
Do you know who's doing the voices of Station, Tom?
I don't know. Is it Ed Solomon?
It's Frank Welker.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Who's that? I don't know that.
Frank Welker is the guy who does voices of everything.
He's the voice of every animal in Hollywood from about 1960 to modern day. He's also probably best known outside of that for voicing Fred in Scooby-Doo. Every iteration of Scooby-Doo, with the exception of the new film where it's Zac Efron or someone like that. He's also the voice of Scooby-Doo now since 1980 something.
I recognise the voice of the devil, and apparently that's Frank Welker. But I sort of recognise the voice, but I couldn't figure out where from. But it's definitely a voice I've heard Frank Welker doing before.
Oh, you will have heard, yeah. He's got he basically sounds like Fred from Scooby-Doo. It's a very distinctive voice, and he's a real powerhouse voice actor. Apparently he was friends with Elvis, and Elvis used to just phone him up and tell him to do dog noises down the phone when he got bored.
Dance like a monkey.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the plot and what Station does. So his role within the film is to create the good robot Bill and Ted's to fight the evil robot Bill and Ted's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and
now
what a good job he does.
Well, you made a joke, Alan, about how it's actually just a real robot. playing the evil versions. It basically is just an actual robot playing the good versions of Bill and Ted's robot forms. Yeah, like they are just these hideously clunky but obviously real, like animatronic puppets.
I think he does do a good job. I mean, it doesn't. When you compare it to the future robots, it looks a bit clunky, but he's knocked them up with stuff from B&Q. He's done a terrific job at that station there.
In like 20 minutes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, in the back of a van.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's a really great aesthetic to them as well. Yeah, they look like junk robots, but in a really nice way.
Yeah, the visual effects on them, again, are just wonderful. Yeah. They're really good little puppets. I love them. They're great.
And I did the wigs. Death is the best character in this.
I agree.
Yeah. Death is a real, like, standout, scene-stealing, Yeah, he steals the film, frankly.
Well, he's going to turn up in the third film, isn't he, as well? So we'll see. We'll come back to that. So then we set up this big conclusion where they're going to compete at the Battle of the Bands. Even though they're crap, Tina Turner has let them in.
That's not Tina Turner, that's Pam Grier. That's Pam Grier.
It's Pam Grier doing Tina Turner.
Jackie Brown, but bloody hell.
It does look like Tina Turner, though. I'm not crazy, am I?
It does look like Tina Turner.
So she lets them in anyway, even though they're crap. So they're all building up to do this big concert, which of course then coincides with them they have to stop the bad robots doing it and killing their girlfriends and all that sort of nonsense. Oh, we have sort of skipped over the part where they propose to their girlfriends sort of simultaneously.
Well,
Will you marry us?
The babes are most chaste.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, and then we find out they haven't slept with them.
Yeah, our girlfriends are most chaste.
They've got 15th century ideals. So anyway, we're building up to the big climax here where they, fight. And then it's actually quite anticlimactic because the good robots just turn up, punch the heads off the bad robots in one fell swoop.
Incidentally, we talked about how Station had done a great job on designing these robots. Let's also point out what a great job he did on the joystick, because the joystick has that free movement, so you can get them to go forwards, backwards, side to side, and a big punch the head off button.
Also, the robots clearly move and do things when the joystick is not being handled, so they always have some autonomy as well.
I'm assuming the head punching is a reference to those Rock'em Sock'em robot toys that you get.
Maybe, yeah.
That I think were a big deal in America in like the 80s.
But they do go to the trouble of having a scene earlier on to establish that their heads pull off quite easily when they're playing basketball with their heads. Which works in itself just as a sort of silly little scene, but then it's like, okay, their heads come off.
I like the way the evil robots just resign themselves to their fate. They don't even put up a fight. They just kind of go like, oh wow, those robots are designed well enough that we can't beat them. Oh, well, it is a bit of a damp squib of a climax, but...
Well, I think it's because they're then waiting for the big bad to turn up.
Yeah, then the big bad comes and they have a bit of time travel shenanigans with him where...
I mean, that's not the climax, Sol. The climax of the film is God gave rock and roll to you.
That's not the climax, that's the prestige.
They go away for 16 months of intensive guitar training and they come back as good as Kiss.
Yeah.
And looking like ZZ Top.
Well, Alex Winter looks like ZZ Top. Keanu Reeves looks like contemporary Keanu Reeves, pretty much. Yeah, he's grown a little bit.
Yeah.
I really love this ending. I love conceptually. We know their music has to do something big to bring the world together. And then the idea that this big bad goes back in time, does a huge broadcast across the entire world on all frequencies, like announcing his evil plan. But then that leads to them doing a performance of their song to the entire world. And we see everyone across the world like getting really into it. And, oh, we're not dead. Oh, what a great song. And then we get this montage of, all the newspaper headlines. It's such a nice...
It's neat. It's a neat bit of storytelling.
Yeah, I really like it. I really do. I think... And it's such a great, just conclusive ending to what this is. which
what they set up in
I'll
the first film.
touch on when we talk about the upcoming film in a minute. But yeah, it's really nice, and those like I said before, the headlines on those newspapers have got some really good gags in them.
Yeah.
Really kind of pays off, I think, everything we've been watching in both films in a lot of ways.
Oh, one other thing that made me laugh at the end, Rufus comes back and he's talking to Bill and Ted. And at the very beginning, when we first see Joss Ackland, Rufus says, "My old teacher." And it sort of implies like he's a sort of Jedi master type relationship. And then at the end, he says, "Oh yeah, he used to be my gym teacher." Also, I liked it when Ted describes his girlfriend as being from medieval England, Iowa.
Oh yeah, that is a great joke.
Yeah, let's rate it then. Let's put it to bed.
I mean, look, this film is generally regarded as a bad sequel, a messy, if ambitious follow-up, but it has taken on something of a cult following, and it certainly seems to be the one they always show on TV, and you know, I think there is a growing sentiment that perhaps it is better than the first, and that's definitely where I land. Having rewatched these two now, I used to think of them as being pretty much one and the same, but I think the second one is actually a much better film, to be honest. It's more ambitious, it has a lot more going for it in terms of scope and direction and just how inventive it all is. And I think its offbeat, bizarre nature just plays into, you know, what it's doing. It's just got a nice sense of humour. So yeah, I give it, I'm only giving it another 7 out of 10. It's not that much of a step up from the first, but let's say the first one's quite a weak 7, whereas this is quite a strong 7.
Well, I think there's, rather like the first film, there's an awful lot happening. They cram so much into 90 minutes. And as a consequence, it is a bit of a mess, but I don't mind. I think it works. I think it's okay. It's not like they're trying to tell a great narrative story. It's just, you know, it's a fun film. My biggest problem with this, and it may be as a result of having watched the two films pretty much back to back, Bill and Ted are basically annoying. You know, you wouldn't want to, like, if you were locked in a room with them for any period of time, they would really get on your nerves. And by the end of the second film, they were starting to wind me up a little bit. But it's 3 hours is a bit much. But I think, like you said before, they've got a lot of charm. And for me, the best bit of this film, the best bit of both films really, is the character of Death. I think that's such a well written and well portrayed character. I'm gonna give this a 7 out of 10. I do think it's a slight improvement on the first one, but I really put them about on par.
Didn't you give the first one 8?
Yeah.
Oh, did I? Well, you know, we have discussed before that I give these films marks and then completely forget. In that case, I will give this one an 8 as well, because I want to give it the same mark as the first one, and I've already forgotten what.
Yeah, I kind of largely agree with you, Sol, except I think I quite like how sort of pure and simple the first one is. It's much. I really like the ambition of this film and how I wish that the whole was the sum of its parts, and I don't think it is. So whereas I gave the first one a kind of mediocre 7, I'm going to give this one a generous 7. I want to give it a 7, but I think that's probably a little bit generous. But that's fine. It does survive on its charm and likability. But I do appreciate that they went somewhere different with it. They tried some cool new things, and I think a lot of it works.
It's definitely a messy film in a lot of ways, but then, to be honest, you know, even though the first one is a lot purer and simpler, I think the first one's also a bit messy. It doesn't really bother me that this is trying to do more and is messy with it, because I just think it's about neither film are particularly well structured, streamlined things. So but there we go. Yes, remarkably positive outlook towards these films, much like Bill and Ted.
Well, congratulations, podcast dudes, on the most excellent record.
Yeah, but we're not done yet. There is a third film.
Yeah, obviously there was talk immediately of a third film, but then they've been dealing with this kind of let's go back to the well for at least 10 years.
Oh yeah. This is one of those long gestating, you know, they're asked about it every few years kind of films, and I suppose it reminds me a bit of Ghostbusters 3, which was this, you know, every time Dan Aykroyd did an interview, he'd say, "Yeah, it's written, we're going to make it next year." and there'd be a slew of headlines.
And then Bill Murray would say, piss off, I don't want to do it.
Yeah. But I think this is very similar, because pretty much every time they were asked about it, Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter, they said, yeah, we'd love to do a third one. Or, yeah, they're writing it. We're just trying to figure it out. So it's
What's Keanu Reeves' position? Has he always been on board, or is he?
I think so. Yeah, I think he's always
he seems
been
like the sort of guy who'd be up for it.
Yeah, I think he's always been very positive about his time on Bill and Ted, and acknowledging that it did a lot for his career, and I think he's always been willing to return. From what I can gather,
it's the most close to himself he's played. Like it's the most natural performance he's done.
But I think because someone like him said, yeah, we're trying to get it together, hopefully going to film it in 2 years' time or something, that means that there's been headlines about this project and how they're making it for years and years and years, and one thing has got in the way here and delayed it there, and it's ultimately taken about 10 years to get it off the ground, which isn't unusual.
Yeah, you got to work around Keanu Reeves' schedule
in Hollywood
and all that as well.
Yeah. And just pull the money together, because it's not a third Bill and Ted is by no means a slam dunk in terms of investment from a film studio point of view. I was reading that apparently most studios they met with wanted to reboot the franchise rather than create a straight down the line sequel.
Yeah.
And you can sort of see that, because I do wonder to what extent this film will have any mainstream appeal.
But that's it. I think it's got enough nostalgia appeal. You just need to put the budget accordingly.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone knows of Bill and Ted. Like, they've all heard of it. And I think most people, certainly in this country, have seen bits and pieces of these films on TV, because they certainly used to be on all the time. The audience is there.
Do we know anything about the film? What's the plot?
Well, I've seen a couple of trailers.
The basic idea of the plot, from what I can gather, is they were meant to write this big song that brought the universe together. They've hit like age whatever they are, 50, 40 something.
I think even the in character they have to be in their 50s, yeah.
But they're firmly in their in middle age, and they haven't written the song and brought the world together yet. And someone from the future turns up like, guys, you've really got to write the song because history's not going the way it's planned. Now the problem with that is it completely seems to fly in the face of what we see happen at the very end of the previous film, which is they bring the world together with their music. The trailer doesn't really get into that. I think they have just kind of retconned the end of the previous film, which I'm not a huge fan of. As I said before, I've seen Ed Solomon say something to the effect that those newspaper headlines aren't canon because they weren't written by him and Chris Matheson. They were put together by someone else. But even then, that whole ending seems to be implying that broadcast across the world was when the world came together with their music, and obviously that's not the case. And in the trailer it
wouldn't be hard to write in that that happened, and then 30 years have gone past, things are starting to slip, we need another big tranquil song to bring everyone together.
Yeah,
it wouldn't be difficult to fold that in.
That was a big moment, but nothing's come of it or whatever. The problem is as well, they're set up as these really accomplished musicians at the end of the second film. This seems to be going on the idea that they're still not accomplished musicians. I don't know. So in the trailer, Ted's dad says something to the effect of,
Bill, Ted, enough of the delusions. You didn't time travel, and you didn't go to heaven and hell. Here's a real idea for you. Be role models to your daughters. Get real jobs.
So they seem to be playing up the idea that people don't believe they had these adventures, even though there's some pretty tangible evidence in front of big crowds of people. So I'm not entirely sure about the logistics of the film and making it work. And obviously I'll have to wait and see it before I pass judgment on that.
I mean, there's something that happens in one of the trailers I saw that I assume gives away the ending, or at least something that must twist later on, in that one of the people from the future says something along the lines of,
a song created by Preston Logan, performed tonight, will save reality as we know it.
And the fact that they use Preston and Logan specifically is really sort of odd. But then, of course, the whole point of this film is that they're daughters.
Well, here's another retcon. Although they have two sons at the end of Bogus Journey,
Bill Jr. and Little Bill and Little Ted, they
now have two daughters, and it doesn't appear to be that they had like second kids. It seems to be that those two kids at the end of the first film are actually they were just wrong when they called them sons.
Oh, no, they're called Billy and Theodora.
Yeah, and
No, I'm serious.
my understanding is those two kids we see at the end of Bogus Journey are in fact both girls. So
yeah,
that's a little bit of continuity for you there.
So yeah, I assume the ending is going to be it's their daughters who are kind of going to change the world now with their music somehow. But they obviously go on some sort of adventure because at some point they meet a sort of alternate version of themselves.
My understanding is that this film's concept is a kind of It's a Wonderful Life, where they see, or A Christmas Carol, where they see alternate realities, versions of themselves where things went differently.
Because there's one where they're in
the
prison.
The one in the trailer.
Like,
yeah.
Very visually startling one.
Yes.
But it looks silly. But weirdly enough, they look less weird there than they do just as Bill and Ted, because, you know, Keanu Reeves looks like he's got some sort of rubber face on.
Well, Keanu Reeves is remarkable for having not aged, but a big part of that is, you know, something I've also discovered is that he has a little beard on him, and that really does wonders to like give your face some definition. So when we see him now, an old man who's shaven, it's very startling, and I think it's a shame they didn't let him keep the facial hair he had at the end of the second film that would kind of bring his face together a bit. But I mean, I'd be well up for that, and Alex Winter having a ZZ Top beard the whole time, but I guess they're trying to get away from that ending as much as they can. I'm worried about this film, just because what I was saying about the tone of the previous two films is so far removed from modern films that I'm just really worried if this is the same tone, which it does appear to be more or less in the trailer, I don't know how well it's going to work. It's just going to feel a bit out of time.
But is it playing on that, the nostalgia element anyway? Is it just going to work on that level and that's fine?
I think, to be fair, I can believe it's going to be every bit as good as the other two, because it's the same creative team, and it doesn't strike me like these are going to be easy films to cut a trailer for. The trailer certainly doesn't sell me on it.
So what would you have done, Sol? What's your third film in the Bill and Ted canon?
I mean, conceptually, I like what they've got here. It's just
30 years too late.
Yeah, exactly. And I hope they find a way to justify the inconsistency with the second film. But, you know, you don't want to do out-and-out time travel again. You don't want to do out-and-out afterlife again. You've got to come up with something else. And it seems like they've done that with this, you know, alternate versions of what could have been concept that apparently they're playing on. So I think that's a really good concept, actually. And
what about sort of a flipping the fish out of water thing, like the Crocodile Dundee 2, where you take him somewhere else? So it could be set in the future that is, you know, influenced by Bill and Ted's thoughts, and somehow we get some straits from the past or something that have to come and change something. I don't know, like reverse the whole thing around.
I mean, it's like, yeah, I agree with Saul. I think the way they just completely reinvented it for the second film worked, because really, for me, I think the first film is one of those times where everything just sort of comes together, and it is the greater than some of its parts, you know, like the chemistry you get between the actors, which you can cast for that to some extent, but, you know, to make them that likable, the writing works, even though the script is a bit weird and messy. And the fact that they managed to get away with it a second time as well, I think says a lot. Yeah, I mean, with 30 years later, it's...
I am worried, and a lot of that as well seems to be, although they've made a big point of not resting on nostalgia and rehashing stuff, we know that death is going to come back and be a part of the film. William Sadler's reprising the role. Apparently, Billy the Kid is also coming back. I think Socrates might even be coming back. So to me, that does scream of, we're going to rehash nostalgia from the other films. And that's not what I want. I want brand new characters.
With that sort of thing, though, I think you're going to, at best, it's going to be a little throwaway gag. Oh, hey, Socrates, you know, what are you up to? Because, I mean, the guy's dead, so it's obviously not going to be the same actor. But, you know.
Well, that's fine, except I think death does seem to be quite a big part of this film.
I think that'll work, though. I think you can make that work.
Yeah, I hope so.
If he's the one guiding them through different lives or whatever.
And there are new characters, in it. We've got Gillian Bell is in there playing someone. We've got Kristen Schaal.
She's like the new George Carlin.
And we have the two daughters played by Bridget Lundy Payne playing Billy Logan, and someone I'm a huge fan of, Samara Weaving, playing Thea Preston, who I'm glad to see graduating somewhat from the schlocky horror comedy kind of world she's been playing in for a while now. I really fancy Samara Weaving. It has to be said. I'm really glad she's not playing Ted's daughter, because there'd be all sort of like weird incestuous undertones in the back of my head because of the family resemblance,
Like going back, if I was to make a sequel at the time, I would definitely have gone the Socrates Billy the Kid Adventures Through Time or something like that. Oh, they're just
as a spin-off,
comedy duo just going off doing stuff.
Yeah,
you're right. I think that would have been a great film.
I think, to be honest, it's not something that would excite me in the same way, but if I was looking at this as an exec with a load of money trying to make something that's gonna justify the spend and everything, I think the sensible thing here would be a kind of Netflix TV series. There's a lot of those that appeal to fans of a specific movie from the 80s. Ash vs. Evil Dead is a good one to kind of pull to mind. That's obviously not a Netflix show, but it's providing a sequel of sorts to a long dormant franchise with an aging star, but it absolutely works for people who haven't spent years watching and rewatching those old films. And I think you could pick up with an aging Bill and an aging Ted and do a run of 10 episodes of them having different adventures through time, tie it all together with this overarching plot of they have to write a song and maybe they're looking for inspiration through time or something.
Looking for the new sound.
Yeah, that strikes me like certainly the safest way to do it, but...
Yeah. Well, we shall see, and we'll do a little Diminishing about it when we watch it.
Yeah. And it does seem pretty firmly set for a release date now on the 1st of September, having been delayed a few times. That's apparently going to be in cinemas and video on demand the same day, which I think is them hedging their bets as to whether or not cinemas are going to be open and just saying, right, it's this day, that's it. So sounds like it will be coming out this year.
Well, that's it. Bill and Ted. Thanks, Gareth, for joining us once again.
Yes, thank you.
Most excellent.
Yes, for this most excellent podcast. Who knows when this episode will actually be out? It's before the 1st of September, hopefully.
Yeah, we can't even talk about what's next week because I'm not entirely sure what will have already been and
the schedule's
where
changing
this is
all
going
the
to
time.
land.
Is there anything the Patreons are voting on at the moment or anything like that?
We've got an upcoming Pixar tie-in, which we've decided we're going to throw out to Patreon to select which Pixar film we're going to cover.
Bear in mind, we've already done Toy Stories.
And Finding Nemo.
Yeah.
And The Incredibles.
Oh, yeah.
Bloody hell.
But all the others are fair game.
All right, then. So we shall see you in the future. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.